They lied about who destroyed the Sphinx's nose to protect their reputation. The truth about our monuments has been buried for centuries, and what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about Egypt's most sacred guardian. For over 200 years, they've blamed Napoleon's cannons for this act of vandalism. But here's what they don't want you to discover: Napoleon never touched that nose. The real destroyers were far more systematic, far more deliberate, and their motives cut to the very heart of why African history has been erased from textbooks worldwide. You're about to become one of the few people who knows the actual documented truth about what happened to the Great Sphinx of Giza. And once you understand who really did this and why, you'll never look at historical narratives the same way again. The first lie they tell you is that Napoleon's artillery accidentally hit the Sphinx during target practice in 1798. This story has been repeated in museums, documentaries, and history books for generations. But here's the problem: sketches of the Sphinx from 1737, 61 years before Napoleon ever set foot in Egypt, already show the nose missing. The Danish explorer Frederick Louis Norton drew detailed illustrations of the Sphinx in 1737, and guess what? No nose. So if Napoleon didn't destroy it, who did? The answer takes us back to 1378 CE, to a man whose name has been deliberately obscured from popular history, al-Dahr. This Egyptian Arab historian Muhammad al-Makrizi documented exactly what happened. al-Dahr was a Sufi Muslim who became enraged when he discovered that local farmers were making offerings to the Sphinx during droughts, treating it as a sacred deity. In his religious fervor, he climbed the monument and systematically destroyed the nose and beard. But here's where the story gets deeper. Al-Makrizi also records that the local population was so outraged by this vandalism that they lynched al-Dahr on the spot. Our ancestors knew the value of what had been destroyed. They understood that this wasn't just a statue, it was a guardian, a keeper of ancient wisdom that connected them to their pharaonic heritage. Think about this carefully. Why would European historians prefer to blame Napoleon rather than tell you about al-Dahr? Because the Napoleon story serves a specific narrative. It makes the destruction seem accidental, almost romantic, the unfortunate casualty of military campaigns. But the real story reveals something far more uncomfortable. It shows that iconoclastic religious movements, often supported or encouraged by foreign powers, have been systematically destroying African monuments for over 1,000 years. The evidence doesn't stop there. When Napoleon's expedition arrived in Egypt, they brought with them over 160 scholars and artists as part of the Commission des Sciences et des Arts. These weren't soldiers looking for target practice, they were academics documenting everything they saw. Dominique Vivant Denon, the expedition's chief artist, created incredibly detailed drawings of the Sphinx. Not once did he or any of his colleagues mention damaging it. In fact, they were so fascinated by the monument that they spent weeks measuring and sketching it from every angle. Napoleon himself wrote in his memoirs about being awestruck by Egypt's ancient monuments. This was a man who understood the propaganda value of being associated with great civilizations. Why would he order the destruction of something that elevated his own mystique as a world conqueror? The answer is simple: he wouldn't, and he didn't. But here's what really happened to the Sphinx that they don't teach you in school. Between 1400 and 1800 CE, Egypt was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. During this period, local authorities often encouraged the destruction of pre-Islamic monuments to demonstrate religious orthodoxy. The Sphinx wasn't the only victim. Countless temples, statues, and inscriptions were defaced or destroyed during these centuries. European travelers from the 1600s and 1700s documented extensive damage to monuments throughout Egypt, all occurring long before any European military campaigns. The deliberate campaign to blame Napoleon began in the 1800s when European archaeologists started taking control of Egyptian antiquities. It was politically convenient to blame a military accident rather than acknowledge the systematic cultural destruction that had occurred under Ottoman rule, especially when many of these same European powers were now positioning themselves as the protectors of Egyptian heritage. This lie serves a dual purpose. First, it absolves religious extremism of responsibility for cultural destruction. Second, it reinforces the narrative that Africans cannot be trusted to protect their own heritage, justifying European control over our artifacts and museums. Today, the British Museum, the Louvre, and institutions across Europe house millions of African artifacts, often using the excuse that they are protecting them from local instability or neglect. The Sphinx's nose became the perfect symbol for this propaganda. But our ancestors understood what the Sphinx truly represents. Ancient Egyptians called it Hoi Make, meaning Horus of the horizon. It wasn't just a monument, it was a representation of divine kingship, of the pharaoh as the living embodiment of cosmic order. When that nose was destroyed, it wasn't just vandalism. It was an attack on the very concept of African divine authority. Every time you see that damaged face, remember this: the destruction was deliberate, the perpetrator was documented, and the cover-up continues to this day. Your ancestors built monuments that have survived for over 4,000 years, monuments so magnificent that people still travel across the world just to stand in their shadow. The real question isn't who destroyed the nose. The real question is this: what other truths about African greatness have been buried under convenient lies? When you understand that even the story of the Sphinx's damage has been manipulated to serve foreign narratives, you begin to see the matrix of deception that surrounds African history. You are the descendants of the pyramid builders, the inheritors of Kemet's wisdom, and the guardians of truth that libraries try to burn. Follow Ponor Lens, because your ancestors' true story deserves to be told.